Great, lovely. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. I can see lots of familiar faces there, and it's really lovely. And I feel very privileged to be with you all. And I can see that some people are coming from hospital beds, and some people are coming from their beautiful homes and their gardens. There's a few people that look like they're in intergalactic space. Bob Ridley, not quite sure which planet you're on, but it's great to see you all. So I'm on the lands of the Wurundjeri people. I live very close to the Birrarung River, the home of Bunjil and Paninyong the Bat, and of course Brother Crow, Wah the Crow. So I acknowledge along with you all the elders past and present, and commit myself to being part of justice telling into the future. I'm going to start with someone's words who are not my own, and I'm pretty sure that many of you will know who is speaking these words. So I'll just bring it up now. Okay. And in this, God showed me a little thing, the quality of a hazelnut, lying in the palm of my hand. And it was as round as any ball, and I looked upon it with the eye of understanding, and I thought, what may this be? And it was answered thus: it is all that is made. And I marveled at how it might last, for I thought that it may have fallen into nothing, for it was so little. And I was answered in my understanding: it lasts and shall last forever, for God loves it, this little thing. And in this I saw three properties. The first is that God made it. The second is that God loves it. And the third is that God keeps it forever. Can anyone guess whose words they are from? Pop it up. First person in the chat who gets it right gets a lollipop from Dick Carter. He'll post it out to you. Julian of Norwich. I could hear Coralie yelling from her muted screen. That's right, Coralie. It's Julian of Norwich, who was born in 1342 and we think passed away sometime in the 1420s. So she lived a long life for a woman of that time. And I am starting today's conversation with a quote from her, because in this time of pandemic chaos and climate chaos, I thought it might be helpful to do as Matthew Fox has just recently done in his newly published book, Julian of Norwich, Wisdom for a Time of Pandemic and Beyond, and to look to one of the prophets of our tradition, a prophet who lived out her life not only as a panentheist, who saw in all things the God who lives and moves and is our being, but who also lived her entire life during the worst plague in European history, the worst pandemic ever known. Does anyone know which pandemic that was? We pandemic dwellers. Any ideas? What was that? No idea. It was, my friends, the bubonic plague. So Julian of Norwich lived for over 80 years, and throughout that entire time, here's a word that's very zeitgeist for you, the waves of the pandemic that poured out over her and in her lifetime for over 80 years. And the bubonic plague killed up to 40 to 50% of the population of Europe. So she, like us, lived in a wild time. And among Julian's teachings are these: the first good thing is the goodness of nature, and God is the same thing as nature. So she said lots of other things, of course, but I'm just pulling those two out. Let me ask you a question. When you are in trouble, and some of you might be in trouble right now, or some of you might have just come from trouble, or some of you might see trouble looming on the horizon. But when you are in trouble, from where does your help come? Do you lift up your eyes to the hills? Do you go outside and sit amongst your roses, or walk out onto the street and look up at the day-blind stars? Maybe you turn to your friends and community. Maybe you've got a special animal companion. Do you go, as Jesus once told us to do, into the quiet room inside, the room of your heart, and close the door and sit with God in meditation and in prayer? For Julian of Norwich, when she was in trouble, she did lift up her eyes to the hills, but she also said this: be a gardener. Dig a ditch, toil and sweat, and turn the earth upside down, and seek the deepness. The water plants in time continue this labor, make sweet floods to run, and noble, abundant fruits to spring. Take this food and drink and carry it to God as your true worship. So can I get a little hands up there? How many of you are gardeners? Can I just see? You can pop a little hand. You might have geraniums in a pot. You might have a wild forest in your backyard. So we've got quite a few gardeners there amongst us. Can I ask another question? Who here finds solace or inspiration or balm, the balm of Gilead, or renewal from being out in the wild? Now, the wild for you might just be your local park, or it might take you back to thinking about bushwalking days or being down by the ocean. But I'm imagining that for most of us, there is a real awareness of how much wonder and solace there is to be found in God's creation. So Julian recognized, in what for her time was a completely countercultural way, that nature was not the enemy, and that nature was actually brimming and swimming and pulsing with the Spirit. And we know that Spirit to be part of the heart of God. And so while all those around her, were fleeing nature and loathing nature and terrified of nature, because they saw in it, along with all fleshly things, a place of sin, and in their understanding the cause of the plague, Julian, she was keeping bees in her anchor hold, which was attached to the wall of the church where she had been walled in, and she was preaching about gardens and having mystical visions of hazelnuts. And as Matthew Fox would say, Julian was a theologian who offers us an alternative vision of God. Instead of giving us the punitive Father God, she presents us with a loving Mother God. Instead of exalting survival for the few, she declares a democracy of justice and caring. Instead of dualism of body versus soul, masculine versus feminine, human versus nature, she proclaims unity. And instead of raping and plundering Mother Earth, she honors the divine in nature and the web of creation that Hildegard of Bingen wrote songs about. So Julian was part of a changing of consciousness that we are still, all these years later, grappling to embrace. She was part of a movement from the ideology of original sin to a consciousness of original goodness and original blessing, that lovely phrase given to us by Matthew so many years ago. She was part of a movement from guilt to gratitude. And when we are grateful for something, when we allow ourselves to love rather than to fear. And the reason in Julian's time that they actually feared nature so much, apart from all the ideas about nature being the place that we had been flung into after the Garden of Eden, was because they actually thought that it was the source of the bubonic plague. And what was happening in that time, it was the beginning of this real sort of era of flagellation and people going out into the streets and beating themselves senseless, until finally the Pope of the time actually had to come out and say, you've got to stop. This is not what is causing the plague. So it was this real fear and sort of energy in the air for the whole of Julian's life that nature was bad and that you had to stay away from it in order to keep safe. So I'm just wondering in this time of pandemic and climate crisis that we are in, and I'd be sort of astonished if you don't all put up your hands for this, but maybe there's some of you who are very zen and have moved beyond panic, but hands up if you felt a little overwhelmed. Anyone felt a little overwhelmed over the last year, 2020? This is the first time many of you have seen each other since then. Have any of you felt a little trapped? Little trapped? Maybe felt a little locked in? Maybe felt a little shut down? Maybe perhaps you also felt that there is nothing that you could possibly do from this place of shut down and trapped and locked in to be part of defending Mother Earth. Is that the case for people? Have you felt a bit powerless and a bit, no, I'm hearing some no. I wish we could do talking on this, but Dick said there's going to be too many of you, so we're not allowed to. But if you want to put in the chat, if any of you have been feeling, actually, I haven't felt overwhelmed, or I haven't felt trapped, I would love to hear from you and hear how you got yourself through. This defending Mother Earth, this is sort of the energy behind part of what the talk today is about. But I wanted to start with Julian because I just think the parallels of her life as someone who lived through the worst pandemic in human history that went for so long, and also as a woman who, admittedly, she chose to be locked up. She was anchored into a church for about 30 years. So they built a wall around her, and she had a little window looking into the church on one side and a window out onto the street on the other. And she stayed there for nearly 40 years. So she chose to be locked up, and none of us did. But I thought there were some nice parallels for us as a launching place for today. But the title of this talk is about faith on the front line. And partly what I'm here to talk to you about today is why our tradition collectively as progressive Christians, and why my vocation as an ordained minister, calls us to stand in solidarity with those who choose to put their bodies on the front line of climate justice and to be part of protecting our planet. So I'm going to ask you a few more questions, and I'm going to get your hands up. It's a question I often start with when sharing stories of activism and hope. And I partly ask it to remind ourselves of all the things that you have already done, because a lot of you are a lot older than me, and a lot of you have been fighting these fights for a lot longer than I have. I'm doing some study at the moment. I'm doing my master's, and fool that I am, even the name masters is ridiculous, isn't it, Coralie Ling? But I don't know what the feminine kind of, the feminist equivalent. But I was reading all about the women's movement in the 70s, and I was reading about what it was like to be a woman in Australia in the late 60s and early 70s. And it was so shocking. And I do remember it from my mother. I do remember hearing the stories, and I know the history. But there was something about just having this particular woman, she's a psychiatrist, naming it so clearly on the page. And I went, I wouldn't be able to be doing anything that I'm doing if it wasn't for women of generations before me who have stood up and fought and fought and fought. And when it comes to climate justice, I know that many of you have been part of land care, you've been part of protecting the planet in all sorts of different ways. So I'm not offering this talk to you today in any sense that I'm not aware of how much all of you have already done. But let's me just ask these little questions. So hands up if you've ever signed a petition to protect something on the planet. Might have been the Great Barrier Reef, it might have been a numbat or a quoll or a forest. Yeah, so we've got lots and lots of hands. Okay, hands up if you've ever marched in a rally of any kind to protect. Yep, we've got a lot of rallies. Hands up, this is maybe stepping a little bit further away from some people's experience, but if you've ever been part of an act of non-violent direct action. Has anyone been part of an act of non-violent? Oh, we've got Ingrid Mary's got a hand up. No, oh, Bob's been part of it. Yep, we've got Elizabeth, but I don't think it's Elizabeth because it's got a lovely beard. So I'm not sure. We'll hear from you later. Great. So we've got a few people and maybe some more that I can't see who have been involved in non-violent direct action. Hands up if you, here's one more question. Have you ever broken the law? Have you ever broken the law to stand up for what you believe in, and in particular to stand up for the planet? We got any hands up for this one? I'm flicking through the screens. Not Robert Renton. Robert, I would have taken you for a rabble rouser. No. David Merritt, never broken the law, never been arrested. No, oh, hello, David, you have been. Have you been? Oh, this is exciting. We'll find out from David later on what he did. Okay, so let me tell you a story. Okay, so about 3 years ago, and Dick referred to this incident at the beginning, I tumbled out of an enormous truck with a trailer and built-in kitchen and 2 dogs and 7 other activists, and we had just been released from police custody after blocking the gates at the site of where the Adani mining company was attempting to build a railway line to carry coal, where it will be put onto a ship, where it will cross over the Great Barrier Reef and out into a world that does not want it. India has already said it's phasing out coal, does not need it, and certainly cannot burn it if we are to have any chance of reducing carbon emissions and saving the planet. So we had left the base camp at 4 in the morning, and we got to the site of the gate and we sat down and we began to pray. As I went down to Adani to pray, studying about that good old way, and who shall wear the starry crown? Good Lord, show me the way. So that was back about 3 years ago. And then back in 2019, back in the good old days when we were still allowed to cross borders, you remember 2019, I went up to the proposed mine site again. And this time I went up to the workers' camp. And this time we left the base camp at 1 in the morning and we drove along a dirt road for 4 hours under stars so bright they burnt your eyes. And once again, with other folk of faith, Buddhists and Jews and Indigenous of the dreaming, we sat down and we blocked the gates. We blocked those gates for 5 hours and then we were arrested. Now, the reason we decided to sit down and pray is because we were there representing not only our own conscience, our own souls, our own heart song, but also religious and faith traditions from around Australia. Because we believe that as people dedicated to the common good, inspired by our beliefs and energized by our spirituality, people of faith can and should be at the forefront of creating a safe climate. And so we sat down and we prayed. We sat down and we prayed. Now, I believe that Jesus and other prophets and activists and holy ones just like him, I believe they come as types of slaps in the face of the sleeping world. Wake up, they cry, wake up. God is not the God of empire and tribe, and we are more than our gender, and we are more than our caste, and we are more than our creed. Wake up. Do you remember the beloved story of Jesus picking up the little child and holding her close and saying, if any of you so much as harm a hair on this child's head, woe to you. Do you remember that story? And what, my friends, is inaction on climate change, if not the most profound harm to every single child on this planet? Many of you are parents, many of you are grandparents, some of you might even be great grandparents. All of you were once a little child yourself. And all of you looked out into the great wonder that is the world, that is creation, with jacaranda trees, a fire with indigo flame. All of you know what it is to love and be loved by the wild. Now, the activists that I worked with and have continued to work with for many years now, most of them are not people of faith, but they are people, or in terms of they're not people of faith in the traditional sense of the word, but many of them are what we would call spirit people. And many of those people up at the base camp where I was staying, they've been up there for over 4 years. And many of them are people who have dedicated their lives to holding the line. Campaign after campaign, battle after battle, some lost, some won, the Franklin, Maules Creek, Jabiluka, the Pilbara, and now Adani. Their skins are calloused and creased with the sun and the dirt. They sleep in swags. They make decisions like by consensus. They're a bit like the Uniting Church. They gather under tents. They leap in and out of trucks to stop a drilling. They lie down in front of earth movers. They are young. Some of them are very old, and they are all filled with passion. Their hearts have been broken over and over and over again. But they don't give up. They are giving their lives to stem the rising tide of despair. And the only time I ever saw a flash of what looked like anger in their eyes was when I spoke of the people to them who spoke about the fact that, well, there's nothing I can do. What do you expect me to do? What can I possibly do? Is this something that you have ever heard yourself say? There's nothing I can do. I'm too old. I'm too sick. I'm too tired. I fought the fight. The powers are too strong. Have a little think. What's alive in you as you sit here right now? What's alive in you as I ask these questions? Do you have hope for our planet? Do you have hope for the children in your lives? Do you feel despair? Do you feel that you are able to be part of change, or do you feel like it's all impossible? You might like to put some thoughts or some feelings up in the chat, or you might like to just listen to the music for a while and allow yourself to be aware of what you feel. That finished a bit quicker than I thought it would. There we go. Okay, we've got some lovely things going, some fire and brimstone and some great passion happening in that chat just there, which is great to see. I'll try and read it in a minute, but I'll keep talking because I know time is precious. So let's talk for a moment about the power of the prophetic. Yeah. Our tradition teaches us to never underestimate the power of prophetic words or actions, and to never underestimate the power of individuals going forth together to change the world, where 2 or 3 are gathered. So, for example, just as a daggy example, if every single person in this conversation today went up to the Adani Frontline, for example, and sat down and refused to move and got arrested, and then the next week another whole tribe of people, say the Lions Club, they decided to go up, and then the week after that, oh, I don't know, librarians for the forest decided to go, or you get the picture. This communal action, this coming together, it sounds like this extraordinary thing to do, but actually it's something that is possible for very many of us to take part in. Don't worry, I'm not going to ask you all to go and do that. I'm going to give you some other options in a minute, but it is astonishing to me how anxious nonviolent direct action makes a lot of people, and how impossible and huge it actually seems. But really, it's a very simple thing, and it's one of the things that has been changing the world since the beginning of time. It's this work of prophetic witness that is perhaps best embodied by the ministry of someone whom I'm sure you've all heard of, Martin Luther King Jr. So King's speeches and sermons, they're well known, but as time passes, his role as what he was understood to be at the time, which was a dangerous radical activist who was arrested time and time again, is at risk of being sidelined. But King's words would have meant little if they were not written from a jail cell, or spoken at the head of a protest march, or preached the day before he was assassinated. And it was his actions and those of tens of thousands of others on the front lines of protest, facing down water cannons and police dogs, that dramatized the injustices and forced change. More, however, it was the disciplined, non-violent nature of this protest that spoke powerfully of an alternative vision, a cosmic Christ vision, in a way that violence could not. So in Australia right now and around the world, there is an organisation called Green Faith, which ARC, which some of you may have heard of, the Australian Religious Response Against Climate Change, is a member. And we are in the final stages right now of planning a day called Sacred People, Sacred Earth. So this is going to take place very soon, next week actually, on March the 11th. And it's a global day of action. And it's a day of action that I'm inviting every single one of you to get involved in. So what we're doing is we're inviting faith communities from around the world for a huge multi-faith event, calling for bold and immediate action on the climate crisis. This is going to be the biggest ever global faith-based day of action for the climate. On this day, March the 11th, the Green Faith International Network will publicise a multi-faith statement calling for recovery from COVID, which will create a more just world order while tackling the climate crisis. This is being signed by high-profile leaders from a wide range of faiths. We've got archbishops and imams and rabbis, as well as regular people of faith. And we'd love you to be part of signing this and asking others to do the same. Also, on March the 11th, places of worship worldwide will be calling for climate justice. And we're going to be sounding the alarm for the climate. So at 11 o'clock, across the world, wherever 11 o'clock is for you in people's time zones, each faith in places of worship, faith-based small groups, or even households can sound the alarm. So people are going to be ringing bells, their church bells are going to be rung, sounding notes on the shofar, calling, chanting, meditating. This event is hoping to be a really simple, really joyous, community building way of getting together and being part of a different type of Frontline. So you don't have to get on a plane and go up to Adani, or you don't have to get on a boat and go over to the Tarkine. You can be at home in your lounge room, or you can be at your church and stand out the front with a little sign and sing a song. And in this way, you too will be part of the Frontline for the forests and the deserts and the reefs and the rivers and the oceans of the world, and for yourself and for your grandchildren and for your own hungry for justice. A few years ago, my daughters and I've got 3 girls, some of you have met them. They're getting very big now. My oldest is 15. We were talking about the possible extinction of the Great Barrier Reef. Why? They wanted to know. Why can't we stop it from happening? Now, back then, I was still learning how to talk to my girls about the human hand in the death of the planet. How do we acknowledge our dark complicity? What I said to them is that it's up to us to be part of stopping it, but that we need everyone. We can choose as Australians to stop the Adani coal mine. We can choose as Australians to stop logging the Tarkine. We can choose to demand climate action from our government. And we as people of faith can encourage other people of faith to be part of standing up for what is the most vulnerable thing in our world, which is the world. And that's actually the job that Christians have always had. But we can only do this if we stand up together. We all know that the children of the world are watching. We know that our farmers and our scientists and our Pacific and Indigenous sisters and brothers are watching, and that the earth is watching. So I'm going to play you a little video now, a short, very short film, and then we're going to move into questions or reflections from all of you. This video is a song called The Northern Lights, or Questions. It's by a band called The Northern Lights, and it's called Questions from Alice. And it's a little girl thinking about all the things that we might lose and that she might lose if we don't stand up for our planet.
The Northern Lights. The midnight sun. $50,000 islands. Squirrels. Bears. Elves. Lynx. Reindeer. Foxes. Wolves. Minke whale. The Northern Lights.
The Northern Lights. The Midnight Sun. $50,000 islands. But why can't we stop it, Mummy? Why can't we save the Great Barrier Reef? But why are they cutting down the trees?
Bears.
Why is the sky black? When will the fires stop?
Reindeer. Foxes.
Foxes.
Wolves. Minke whale.
Minke whale. But we can do something, can't we? We can do something, can't we, Mummy? The Arctic Circle. So that was a little moment from a child asking the questions that children ask, and a moment from a child reflecting on what she imagines that we will lose. I'm just wondering, I'm just aware of time and Dick, thinking now we might want to open it up to the community and see what reflections or questions that people might have.
Yeah. So if you wish to ask a question or to make a comment, send a message to everybody in the chat facility on Zoom, and to get a little bit of order into it, I will moderate the process. So as soon as you get your questions in, I can start handing them over to Alex.
Just while we're waiting for that, I'm just reading through the chat now. And Robert Renton, you've written, activism takes many forms besides being on a protest march or prayer vigil. And I would absolutely agree with you. There are so many different ways that we can all be activists in our different forms. And you know, we think about the Quakers, and we think about Buddhists sitting in prayer, and we think about people creating community gardens. All of those things are forms of activism. But Robert, it'd be great to hear from you, a moment of activism that you're thinking about right now, if you've got one, or maybe he's left.
Greg Crow, you've got a comment here. I'm always taken by the Genesis story that humanity is asked to steward that from which it came. Would you like to make some sort of a reaction to that, Alex?
Sure. I'd love to hear a bit more from Greg, though, because I know that's one of our stories that gives us great blessing, but also we have interpreted in a way that has cursed us. So, and Greg is Greg, you say some more.
Oh, well, I think you're right. I think, unfortunately, there's this take on those stories that make it sound like the earth was cursed and we were cursed, and, you know, that whole fall narrative, which I think is a false narrative, actually, of that story. Whereas I think there's this sense in which, particularly within certain parts of Jewish thought, where they really understand that sense of our very being coming from the earth. You know, we're formed out of dust, and then the Spirit breathes into us, and and it says we became a living being, and then the command is, you know, till the soil, but it's not sort of subjugate the soil. It's steward it, it's care for it. And in a sense, within Jewish thought, there is a sense in which we're being asked to actually take care of your mother, take care of the very thing that gave you birth, take care of yourself. Actually, that's the other part of it. It's in caring for the earth, you are caring for yourself. It's almost an extension for me of love your neighbour as yourself. It is my very essence. And so I think there's within our religious traditions, there is such a strong sense of our connectedness to it, and then our need to care for it in a sense, like we care for our parent, our mother, that from which we came. That's sort of what I was getting at. What do you think? What do you think, Alex?
Oh, no, I agree with everything you've just said. I was just reflecting. I went to sort of an event back in 2019. That was the last time we all left the house, which was organised by the Seed Mob, who are young Indigenous activists, and they had bought some. The focus of their campaign at the moment is on fracking up in the Northern Territory, and they're trying to stop it. And they had bought, in order to sort of inspire and challenge, Melbourne folk, they'd bought some men they were all men that came. The organisers were all women, but the speakers were men, and they were from country, and you could see the cost to them, these young men, of being in this big city. And one of them didn't speak English very well, but he's in his tongue, and there was an interpreter, and he spoke about, he started to cry, and he said, please, it's my mother. You've got to help me to protect my mother. And it was deeply moving and very sort of countercultural to most of the people gathered there, who were, sort of Western secular, crowd, but everyone was weeping with this young man. And I was like, we all know that the earth is our mother. We all know that this is our home. And even the language, to have dominion, the dominion is it's home. It's about your home. So God is saying, if we follow the story, and knowing it's a story, but this is your home, and you have to look after your home, and you have to welcome others into your home. So, yeah. What else?
John Noack has made an observation that the date when there was a balance between the world's population and the world's resources was in 1920. Now 1/3 of the population is well fed, 1/3 is hungry, and the final third is starving. Does this sound like the sad truth? And to that, I'd have to say that one of the things that really should concern us is one of the major moral challenges the world must face, is that we're told by people who study these things that before the Earth's population stabilizes, we're going to add another 2 billion people, about a third more than already exists on the planet. And nobody has felt it ethical or moral to suggest to people that they shouldn't reproduce. What we are looking at on present indications is that it's a foregone conclusion that this is going to happen. And that is going to put amazing stress on the world. Greater encroachment on habitat that's currently pristine or near to pristine. What is a moral reaction to that? What it is that we can do to discourage that from happening, or even prevent it from happening? Is it possible? May not be.
That's a very challenging and very challenging question. And as a mother of 3 children, I feel deeply guilty. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right in terms of like this constant, we need to keep reproducing. And absolutely, that's sort of a way into madness when we consider how many people, as has already been named, are hungry or without a home. So rather than sharing what we have, we've got this obsession with building our population to make more taxpayers. It's a very complex space. Yeah.
You don't have the answer either.
I'm afraid not. I think Dick Smith's got some ideas. He's quite big on that area, isn't he? Like, but yeah.
It's a very serious question that really doesn't, that people avoid talking about, really.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's a tricky question for people of privilege to talk about as well, because we live in a country where if our children get sick, we can take them to the hospital and there is medication and we have enough food for them. But there is a panic in the heart of the dispossessed, and children are your sort of safety net, as well as love, of course, and also contraception and all the complex issues. But I think certainly for the first world, or the world that we live in, it's a question that we should be grappling with, but not one that we should necessarily be asking the developing world to grapple with, even though that's actually the place of the biggest population growth. As we know, population's actually sort of stabilizing or dropping in a lot of European, and Japan's just recently come up with the Minister for Loneliness in Parliament, because there are very few children and very few grandchildren, and people are dying alone in their flats and not being discovered for sometimes years. So yeah, so we do need children and we love them, but I think maybe it's a question for us to be grappling with, and ways that we care for each other in community more, and but not one that necessarily the developing world should be asked to deal with.
Well, up to a point, I agree with that. But I think it really begs the question too, that a first world or a developed country like Australia, what is it doing? And my view is that our immigration policy is ought to be at least significantly, but not necessarily wholly, directed at being able to share what we have with the people who do not. Yep. And that to have a humanitarian immigration target each year, which I think currently is sitting at around 13,000 only, seems to be far, far too little, and that we should be far more generous than we are in terms of being prepared to admit the stranger, to use the Old Testament term, and make them welcome. Instead, what we seem to be doing now, even though our recent history has been otherwise, what we're doing now is being so damn nasty that nobody.
Yeah, that.
Which I find is appalling, quite frankly.
I'm just sorry to interrupt, Dick. I'm just looking. Helen, who is in Timor, hi Helen, has written something really fantastic, I think, up in the chat. And Helen, I'm just wondering if you could speak a little bit more to that, particularly around this idea that it's clear to me that most people in the Labor Party are unaware that people of faith have any interest in these matters. And I think that's a really important point. One of the things that happens when I am, in a rally with Extinction Rebellion, or I'm on a front line somewhere, or I'm doing any of the activism work I do, is I will always wear my either a clerical collar, which I bought specially for protests. Don't normally wear it, obviously, or I'll wear the full alb, like the full, we call it, clerical bling, because what that does is it becomes a visible sign to all the other activists there that actually people of faith care and we're committed, and that actually, and it always sparks off some really interesting conversations. Sometimes people think I'm there in fancy dress in a kind of Mardi Gras way, but usually, and often there'll be some, it's not something that you wear without an anticipation of conflict, because a lot of people are very angry at institutional religion, and especially Christianity, and think that we've got no right to have a voice in the public square anymore, because we lost that right with all the terrible things that we did. And I disagree, because I think we also did a lot of lovely things. But Helen, can you say more about what you've put in the chat?
There, Helen.
Helen, you've got your mic off.
Sorry, yes, I didn't unmute myself, but Since I'm no longer living in Melbourne, my way of interacting with various organisations I belong to in Melbourne is through is often through Facebook groups, and one of these that I'm interested in and was a member of when I was in Australia was the LEAN, the Labor Party's internal, now what's it called, Labor Environment Action Network. And they have some quite good techniques, you know, of getting parties to pass resolutions and then sending them directly to the relevant ministers, or, you know, at the state level and the national level. But when I read the discussion on the Facebook group, it's quite, and there's always a bit of an undertone, also because I belong to the socialist left. There's also an undertone in their things of anti-religion. If anybody comes up with the first thing about religion or Christianity or anything, somebody will come up and attack it and say, oh, you know, you wouldn't expect Christians to do this. And I think some people are even aware of this passage in Genesis that told everybody, as if it means, you know, as was said before, go out and subdue the world and get rid of nature, etc. But in a sense, the point I was wanting to make was the other one. And on one of these groups, we have tried to have a discussion about this jobs versus growth, because old growth forest, logging of old growth forest is always justified in terms of jobs, and jobs that have traditionally been there, you know. And the thing with the Adani is a similar narrative. And I think that what we've got to do is put more focus on what are the good sort of jobs, otherwise known by the Sustainable Development Goals as decent work, that can be created for people to do both profitably and feeling worthwhile. And I think this is exactly where people of faith can come in and, you know, have something to say that may not be quite the same as what the sort of that section of the union movement. I wouldn't say the whole union movement's like this, but that section of the union movement that sees jobs as, you know, some sort of reified thing, jobs, without considering what does it mean, jobs, because the pandemic has shown us that jobs can be very different. People can stay at home and work. Everybody doesn't need to be working all the time. And how can we reorganise the workplace, you know, and vacations and things like this?
Yeah, fantastic. I've written down LEAN, and I'm going to check it out and join their Facebook group. I was just thinking, I was just remembering a book, Coralie Ling would know this book, I am sure, Rita Brock and Rebecca Parker, Rita Nakashima Brock, amazing female theologian. They wrote a book a number of years ago called Saving Paradise. Has anyone? Yes, Coralie's nodding. So I'll just read you out the little blurb because it's very cool. So Rita Brock and Rebecca Parker began traveling the Mediterranean world in search of art depicting the dead crucified Jesus. And they discovered something that traditional histories of Christianity and Christian art had underplayed or sought to explain away. It took Jesus Christ 1,000 years to die. During the first millennium, Christians filled their sanctuaries with images of Christ as a living presence. In a vibrant world, he appears as a shepherd, a teacher, a healer, an enthroned God. He's an infant, a youth, but he's never dead. He's never dead. And he appears with the cross. He stands in front of it, serene and resurrected. And the world around him is ablaze and permeated with images of paradise, blessed by the presence of God. So the point of this book, and the reason I'm telling you about it, is because it's all about how in the early days of Christianity, we didn't fixate on all the things that we began to fixate on. We recognized that Jesus, the story of Jesus and what it was about waking us up to the beauty and the power of creation, which is all around us. It's heaven here on earth, and that our job is to be part of protecting and defending it. So it's a great read if anyone's looking for some fun theology to while away the time. It's 5:06. So if anyone, like Dick, how are we going? Any wild questions that I've missed?
Anyone else wish to make a comment or pose a question?
I think Ingrid Mary would like to speak. Are you still on mute, Ingrid? There we go.
It's in the chat. It's in the chat.
Yep.
It's chat.
Yes. In the chat, you wrote one child each family. Saw that. I've already broken all your rules. Sorry about that.
No, this the last one though. The last one.
There are two stories in Genesis. One is for nature, one is not. Well, not they're I'd say they're both for nature, but one definitely, the second one is definitely sort of, oh no, it's the first one, isn't it? Coralie, help me. The first one, yes. But there's a great bit in there's a bit where, you know, I should have I've got a Bible, but I won't run and get one, where God says, they are, let us now make humans in our image, let us make them. And before God says this, not that any of us are literalists, so it doesn't really matter, but it's fun to play around with. Before God says this, God has made everything else, including all the animals. So a lot of the time this has been interpreted as like, oh, it's the royal we, let us now make. But some theologians have gone, well, no, isn't God just talking to all the animals and the angels and creation and the water, and saying, hey, everyone, now we've made all of you, let's make a new thing. Let's make humans in our image. And I always think that's kind of beautiful. And we know it's a story, but it's a lovely story.
Thank you very much, Alex. That's been wonderful, and we really do appreciate the fact that you put so much effort into being with us this afternoon and putting it to us in a way that's very compelling and challenging. That's what we need.
Well, it was very lovely to be here. Thank you for having me.
We'll get you back before too long.